You are watching CIOTV by Enterprise IT World, a production of Accent Infomedia.
Hello and welcome to CIOTV.live, a sister concern of Enterprise IT World. Today our guest is Mr. Arun Cockerill, Chief Strategy Officer, Lookout, and he's on board to speak to us about the current cybersecurity scenario that has emerged and challenging the entire world. Arun, thank you very much for taking time out and speaking to CIOTV.live.
Oh, no problem. Thanks very much for having me.
All right, Arun. Lookout is a company we started way back in 2007, and till now, if I look at, you have got multiple offices in Asia Pacific. At least you have got 5-6 locations, Middle East 2-3 locations, United States, I think 2-3 locations as well. You have expanded. The growth has happened very fast given the time that you started the organization. If you can introduce the company right from the inception till now.
So Lookout originally started focused on mobile security, as you mentioned, in 2007. So it was initially focused primarily on individuals' phones or personal mobile devices. We received quite a bit of interest, however, from corporations, large businesses seeking to offer security on mobile phones. And we, in the sort of 2016 timeframe, we introduced the ability to secure enterprise phones and enterprise tablets and so on. Well, we work on operating systems of iOS, Android, and Chromebooks. And so then we started to expand into essentially offering security for enterprise for all mobile devices through integration with EMM solutions. So the way our product works still today is we secure an enterprise's data and protect it from being accessed by a device that may be potentially compromised. So if you think about the way that modern operating systems work, like iOS and Android and Chrome, they all run applications in isolation and they don't allow easy modification of the operating system, unlike more traditional operating systems. And so these devices are typically battery operated and so on. So we could not scan or do what a typical antivirus solution would do. So we focused on protecting the corporation's data, since that's what they were seeking to ultimately achieve in any case. So our solution has always been focused on protecting that corporate data from it being accessed by a corporate device. We've had even larger growth more recently and expanded into the securing SaaS applications, securing corporate private applications, and securing access to the broader internet, like a secure web gateway, if you're familiar with that term. And so now that people are working in hybrid work styles, working from home and so on, we're actually able to offer security across all of corporations' infrastructure, whether it be SaaS applications, private or just generally access to the cloud, and do that on any operating system. So we've expanded quite a bit.
All right, Aaron, you have the product line starting from the mobile devices to the cloud. You also offer threat intelligence. So where does your competitive advantage lie? How do you differentiate yourself from the competition?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. So as I mentioned, what Lookout really excels at is determining risk and then protecting data based on that risk. So we have an integrated solution for devices accessing the internet. So we're able to, for example, filter out malicious attacks, phishing attacks, and so on when employees are connecting from home or when they're connecting from the workplace. It doesn't matter where they're connecting from for us. We're also able to monitor that connection for access to sensitive data. Similarly, when a user is accessing a SaaS application, let's say Salesforce or Workday or Office 365, we filter and control that access as well. And then even when they're accessing a private application, either on-prem or running in the cloud somewhere, we apply both data protection policies and anomaly detection policies across all of those different channels of communication, regardless of the device or what network the user is using. So the big differentiation from Lookout is we allow you to do a centralized management of data protection policies and security policies for any device connecting from anywhere. And it'll consistently look at no matter what application or data set you're accessing. And we have a better, I would argue, we have a better assessment of that risk because we look at all the different types of devices that are accessing that data or extending into this mobile set. So most corporations have had the ability to determine if there is malware, for example, on endpoints, but in most cases, when they determine that there's malware on an endpoint, they simply try and remediate that endpoint. What we do is when we determine that there's malware on an endpoint, we control access over all of the channels that I just talked about. And by implementing that controlled access, we can, well, in the instance that it's let's say it was surveillanceware, you might want to shut down access completely. And obviously that would have a negative impact on the ability for that person to work. So I don't want to give the impression that we simply cut off access all of the time. In many cases, it could be a situation where the employee is connected to a network that we're unfamiliar with or using a device that we're unfamiliar with. And so we'll downgrade access, but not cut it off completely. We can redact certain pieces of the content. We can watermark content. We can download it only to be used in an encrypted container. So we can actually allow work to continue, even though there is some level of risk, which is, I think, really critical in today's environment, given that, well, I'm talking to you from my home. I don't know where you're working, Sanjay, but everyone's connecting from different places and on different devices these days. So we have a better assessment of risk than most of our competitors. We have a centralized ability to apply data protection and security policies across all the different types of infrastructure that a corporation may have, and then we can ultimately provide access in any scenario to those the infrastructure the corporation needs to do business.
All right, Aaron, if you look at now the entire world is divided. One part of the geography, the world is engaged in physical war. The other one is in cyber war. Every day, every minute you can expect something or other coming on your way, on the way of the enterprises, the customers. So challenge for our CISO is very many if you look at today's context. Cybersecurity and hacking is very, very sophisticated. The way you used to address the market, the way the CISOs used to look at their defense is completely decimated these days. So they have got a huge challenge. So what is your strategy, the critical challenges that the CISOs facing? I can ask you from 3 geography point of view. One is North America, the other one is Middle East, and third is Asia Pacific. Because 3 geographies, you are pretty present, you are addressing these markets. You understand the psychology challenges of the CISOs. You can start with North America.
Okay. Let me first say that so back to, I guess, in part our differentiators as well, we focus not only on providing access to infrastructure and assessing risk, we have a threat intelligence capability. And so we have our own research into attacks and threats globally. And so we see different threats evolving in different geographies. So you wanted me to start with North America. I would say that in North America, the trends that we see tend to be around, well, the concerning things from an enterprise perspective, we see a lot of ransomware, but I would say that that's global. But ransomware is probably the #1 concern that we see in the North American market at the moment. And the responses that we see from CISOs tend to focus on the detection of the ransomware malware. And I know it might sound a little controversial, and we should look for a defense in depth strategy in most cases, but I would argue that that's not necessarily the right place to be looking. One of the things that we see primarily with ransomware right now is that it's not about just the encryption of the data to disable that business. It's all about it's equally, if not more, about the theft of that data. And through the theft of that data, the bad actors gain leverage over that corporation because they threaten to sell the data or make the data public, and that encourages the business to pay the ransom. So ransomware, big problem, North America, and it's across both small business all the way to very large enterprise, as we've seen in the news. In Europe, I think what we've seen, we see ransomware, like I said, it's global, but we've seen a lot of financially fraudulent attacks. Many, say, for example, mobile applications that will impersonate banking infrastructure. I guess, and I don't necessarily know why the focus in Europe has been around this in particular, but we've seen both applications that masquerade as real banking applications gain traction and allow you to, or encourage you to do financial transfers and so on that are fraudulent, and you end up having individuals and companies having funds stolen. We also saw, this is dated now a little, but we saw a lot of financial attacks around trying to impersonate the organizations that would pay financial aid during the pandemic. And so a lot of social engineering around the fact that people are struggling through the pandemic and working from home in general. In Asia, I think the primary, again, malware and financial attacks are consistent around most of the world, but then in Asia, what we see a lot more in general, phishing and social engineering attacks. So attacks around trying to exfiltrate data, trying to get employees to do things that they would not normally do. I'm trying to think of some specific examples, but and then a common mid-market attack, for example, that we see is masquerading, bad actors masquerading as a supplier into another organization and requesting a change for the accounts payable system to pay money into a different account, and that results in the bad actor receiving payments for the services rendered by the original vendor. And again, these tend to be across, we see all of those three in globally, but if I had to characterize it regionally, I would say that the biggest concern I see out of Asia specifically is mostly around phishing and social engineering.
All right, Darren, the other thing I'm also hearing globally, which is lack of skilled manpower for these CISOs in the enterprises. You have,
Yes.
they are looking for the innovative solutions. I understand that. But who to manage those solutions within the organization? You as a seller, you as an OEM, you go and sell it to the customer. Customer doesn't have a person or a workforce to manage those. And if at all they do have, they cannot be skilled on multiple technologies.
Again, excellent question. And this has been a struggle in our industry actually for many years, but I would say that it's actually been exacerbated. It's gotten worse in the last couple of years. So, and because here's what I see from most customers. It's a combination of a lack of skills, especially in IT focused on security, that existed even before the pandemic. But then what happened was companies had to rapidly move their applications and so on to the cloud and rapidly enable remote workforces. And so we saw people, for example, opening up VPNs to all of their employees, and they were unable to buy laptops for everyone to work from home. So they allowed home computers to connect to the corporate network, effectively bypassing the firewall through a VPN. And all of a sudden, the SOC, the security infrastructure had thousands of tickets to say that all of these devices are now connecting into my network, and it was a very scary time for a lot of IT organizations. So it wasn't just the lack of personnel, it's the fact that most companies had to take on a greater level of risk in order to enable the remote workforce or enable this hybrid work style. And now that most countries have somewhat recovered, I think, or hit some sort of level of equilibrium, if you like, with the number of people working from home, number of people coming into an office, and we're starting to get back to normal. We're still in a state where so many companies have moved things so rapidly to the cloud, they don't have a good understanding of their overall risk. And so the resources that you're saying, the resource gap that you're highlighting is a lot around this new assessment of risk and understanding risk in using new infrastructure. And the best responses we see to that, and I believe companies like Lookout have a big part in this. I think that as our industry evolves, there's going to be two ways that that's addressed. Security companies need to become better at solving the problem for customers instead of alerting them. And so I think that we can do much better from a security vendor's perspective by having better automation and integration with tools across the company's infrastructure. So instead of alerting that Sanjay has surveillanceware on one of his devices, we actually have to lock out Sanjay's accounts temporarily and take automated action so that the security people aren't inundated with alerts and simply trying to manually triage these problems. That's the first one. And we need to do that more intelligently. And that's happening through machine learning and AI, but I think not fast enough. The second way that I see that happening is through the channel. And so we are seeing an increased adoption of managed security service providers, MSSPs, if you like. Our industry seems rife with acronyms. So I think that we will see a lot more of those types of vendors evolving, and that's a good thing because especially in the mid-market, then companies that can't afford to hire 5 people just going through alerts from the SIM will be able to rely on companies that are entirely focused on that. So they're the two things that I see that will ultimately help address that situation.
The other thing is that the attacks and the ransoms or ransomware attacks particularly are not going down anyways. Big names, Walmart, Pfizer, Aramco, big names got attacked,
Yes.
despite having the best of breed security postures. Now, many advocates saying that you need to have a compliance-based cybersecurity posture. When you speak to the CISOs, they are saying the real cybersecurity posture is something different than the compliance-based cybersecurity posture. What is your take on that?
I don't think that, in most countries, and it's different in different countries and different regions, but I would say that as a general rule, regulations and compliance, our legal systems aren't able to keep up with technological advance. So I don't think that simply complying to regulations gets you to a bar that that protects you from things like ransomware. And I think that's obvious from what we're seeing out in the real world. I mean, obviously compliance is necessary for the regulated verticals, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying that unfortunately, it typically lags behind the innovation from the bad actors. So fortunately, you've got companies like ours that are also innovating to protect against those bad actors, but regulation alone doesn't protect you. It's the minimum bar, I would say. So, the CISOs that I talk to that are, very concerned about how to protect their organizations are thinking well beyond regulations as the thing that will protect them, or compliance to regulations as the thing that will protect them.
I think we spoke enough about the challenges of the CISOs and how you are looking at and your perspective on how to mitigate those challenges. Let's come back to Lookout. As a brand, you are emerging, you are growing everywhere. Now, since I'm speaking from a Middle East and Africa point of view, how do you see this market? What is the kind of investment that you have made? And how do you treat this market?
So it's a very important market for us. So it's an important market from two perspectives. The first is, in and of itself, it's an important market for us, and we've made considerable investment to actually be on the ground, actually supporting in the Middle East. But we also see it as part of, many of our customers are multinational and have a presence in that area. So, and I'll give you an example. Our products, given that, for example, we filter internet use on devices, whether you're at home or at work. As it turns out, the filtration of the internet for most organizations is very regional. So what you would filter in one country is different to what you would filter in a different country based on cultural differences and so on. So we've had to address that capability specifically for the Middle East. And then we've also had to, from a product perspective, most regional governments have some level of a requirement for data sovereignty. So we've had to address that capability as well. And let me explain that a little bit. So our threat intelligence relies heavily on the ability for us to gather telemetry, anonymized telemetry from all the devices we protect. So we're able to see, for example, if this device has, even though it's the same physical hardware, it has a different variation on the operating system. So we look at hundreds of indicators of compromise across a device to see if it's been compromised. If we see devices with an anomalous fingerprint from an operating system perspective, then we question whether that device has become compromised. You can think of it almost as crowdsourcing anomaly detection for questionable firmware on a device. We need, however, to maintain that information specific to different regions when it comes to data sovereignty. So we've had to design a system, and one of the big requirements around this was specifically out of the Middle East. We had to design a way that we could exchange that information, yet still isolate the information so that it was never left the Middle Eastern borders or never leaves the EU and so on for compliance with GDPR. So we've focused on enabling business in those regions, even though we're able to aggregate the data from an anomaly detection standpoint. And then obviously we've also done considerable localization to specific languages in Asia, Middle East, and Africa, and so on. So it's an important market to us, like I said, from both perspectives of the markets themselves and then the multinationals that we service that have points of presence in those regions.
Okay, are you kind of direct in terms of your engagement with customers, or you route it through the channel partners?
We sell exclusively through channel partners.
So the other one is that the very, very important question when you approach to the customers, customer come back to ask about what is your commitment in terms of support once you sell out and sell it and go out. Who's going to give you the support? What is the kind of mechanism? What is your commitment to the region in terms of support?
So we have regional support in all of the regions that we do support, physical presence. But because we sell through a channel, we typically, the first level of support would come from the channel partner. But then that's quickly escalated to us, and we have that in region.
As a Chief Strategy Officer, if I can ask you, you must be very eager seeing your brand on the top, whether it is Gartner Magic Quadrant or IDCs or any third-party consultant or the people who read. From a brand point of view, how do you see, where do you want to stand? What exactly you are doing to make it a great brand in maybe a couple of years from now?
I think that the most important thing that we're doing is we're combining the access to data with a company that excels in threat detection. So if you look at most companies that, if you look at most companies that provide access to infrastructure, they rarely have any threat research capability. And if you look at the security companies that are focused on threat research, they rarely have the ability to provide access. We're combining those two things. And I think that that's really important because it's going to differentiate us in an area that we talked about earlier, which is that automation. Today, if you choose a best of breed product to identify threats, you have to then integrate that from an automation standpoint into the tools that control access to your data. And honestly, in our industry, unfortunately, integration between those tools is pretty poor. So if you want to automate the protection of your data because it's difficult to get trained security personnel and you want to more quickly address breaches and that type of thing, you need to have in our opinion, you need to have the company that's looking for threats able to actively respond to protect your data. And I don't think it's possible to do that effectively through integration between separate companies. We believe that it's far more effective to have the company that delivers your data also be the company that protects it. So we think that that will be a significant differentiator for us over the coming years.
What is your expectation of growth for this fiscal year?
I would say that Well, India, I know you didn't mention Middle East and Africa. India has been probably our fastest growth in personnel over the last couple of years. I see at the moment we don't have any development in Africa from an office type perspective. Middle East we do but it's commercial primarily. But I expect that growth to be increasingly decentralized. So what I mean by that is we are hiring people that are the right skill sets as opposed to in the right place. We continue to work in a hybrid work style. We're very distributed as an organization, and we found that we've had great productivity, even though people are not necessarily coming into the office. Now, we want to move to having people spend more time in an office, but it's mostly around like innovation, working together and solving problems as a group, not necessarily to come in and simply work in a cubicle. Our work style has expanded beyond that. So I don't see any, we do have targeted hiring in specific regions, but it's not restricted, for example, to cities or in any particular site. So I would see that as we find the right people, potentially in Africa, potentially in the Middle East, that they're going to be working from anywhere in those regions.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Arun. Pleasure talking to you. You took out your valuable time to speak to CIOTV.live. Thank you once again and stay safe.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.